Understanding your CPT book.
Hello, my name is Renee, and I would like to help you get started using your CPT book. I've had a few students who have actually asked if there was a way that we could come up with some sort of a video or some type of instruction to help students actually be able to navigate through their book and understand how it's laid out and what's coming up in the book before we actually jump into it in the course. So that's what we're going to do today. Our code book is actually written by the AMA, by physicians, for physicians, and in that there's a complex set of codes, not only codes, but code guidelines and formats and symbols that we need to know in order to make the whole coding system work and work appropriately. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each week you're going to be introduced to a new section within the book, but I'm going to show you those sections a little bit ahead of time so that you have an idea of what's coming up. We'll have the surgery section. We'll actually have 8 different sections to it, so within the surgery section, so we'll actually go through those through the course, but I want to give you a little bit of an overall so that you can see what that's like. Mainly so that you can see how the book is laid out, what the format of codes are, the symbols, those types of things. So let's do it.
Okay, first let's go over the objectives. So by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to locate and explain the following terms and how to use them: the alphabetic index, tabular list, the guidelines, instructional notes, parenthetical notes, code format, symbols, and locate the appendix. So here's our code book, and if you haven't already done so, go ahead and get your book out so you can follow along. You may want to also grab a highlighter and a pen or pencil for making notes in your book to help remind you of things that are important. So as you can see here, I have the professional edition of the CPT book. A really nice feature about the professional version is that it's in color. There's also a standard version that's all black and white, but I don't recommend that for a new coder. Even I still use the professional edition. In the front page you will see that you have a quick list of your symbols and modifiers. For this course we will only be using this set of modifiers here on the left. There is a full description of each modifier in the appendices towards the back of your book. They will be in Appendix A, as you can see here. You will want to read each description of the modifiers as we cover them through the course so that you can understand why you're assigning them. All of our modifiers in some way modify the code that it's attached to. For example, a modifier 50 means bilateral. So when you add it to a single code, it makes the code a bilateral procedure. On the next page you can see that you have tabs. I recommend that you use these when you're starting out. I have added some to my book to show you how you can add them, but you can add them any way you like. Over the next few pages you'll find that right after the table of contents there's an introduction section. Please read this section before you begin. You may not understand everything, but as we go through the course you will know where to look back for clarification. It will go into more detail over the things I'm about to cover. The CPT codes are laid out into 6 main sections, and they are each color-coded. I sort of had to bend my book a little bit here to show them to you. Starting with the front of the book, to the back is Evaluation and Management, or E&M, and it's in red. Anesthesia is in blue. Surgery is in green. Radiology is in red. Pathology and Lab is in blue. And medicine is in green. This section makes up what we're going to refer to as the tabular. It contains all of the CPT Level 1 codes listed in numerical order. All the codes consist of 5 numerical digits. E&M codes all begin with a 9. Anesthesia all begin with a 0. Surgery begins with numbers 1 through 6. Radiology all begins with a 7. Pathology and Lab begin with an 8, and all of the medicine begin with a 9. It may sound confusing that we start out with the codes beginning with 9 and end with those beginning with 9, but remember this book was written by physicians for physicians, and whether or not they do a procedure within the book, their professional services are used by all. Now let's look at the alphabetic index. This section of the book is in the back of your book. Here you'll be able to locate main terms, modifying terms, and codes or code ranges that will help guide you to the correct code. You can look up codes in a few different ways here. You can look them up by procedure or service, such as ablation, biopsy, splint, etc. You can look them up by organ or anatomical site, such as the abdomen, a bile duct, eyelid, tibia. You can also look them up by disease or condition, such as an abscess, cataract, tetralogy of Fallot, as well as look them up by synonyms, eponyms, and abbreviations, like EGD, PET scan, or a Keller procedure, and so on. So the best thing here is to not get discouraged when you come across one that's not indexed the way you first look. Remember, you can look for it different ways. Here on the first page of the index, we have most of these as an example. We have the procedure in ablation. We have an anatomical site, abdomen. We have a disease or condition with abscess. And we have an eponym, a Bayes-Landers procedure. Notice under each of these terms, there is information more specific about the code. Let's look at the abdomen. Under abdomen is abdominal aorta, and indented under that is angiography. The code listed to the side is 75635. Do you remember which codes begin with a 7? If you said radiology, you're correct. Now let's look at one more by continuing under abdomen to the abdominal wall. Here we have a lot of choices, but let's say our physician did a debridement of an infected abdominal wall. What codes do you see now? If you have 11005 and 11006, you're correct again. It is important to write both of these codes down when you go back and check in the tabular for the most appropriate code for your scenario. Let's move on to the tabular list. Okay, here we are in the tabular list. But before we go on, do you remember the 6 sections that compose the tabular list? Pause this video and see if you can remember before we go any further. Okay, let's see how you did. Did you say E&M, anesthesia, surgery, radiology, pathology and lab, and finally medicine? If you did, great job. If not, it will come as you get more familiar with your book. The tabular is laid out in an order that is consistent throughout the book. It too has a color coding to it in the professional version that makes it easy to follow. Using the surgery section again, you can see that the section is in black. Next is the subsection, and it's always in green. Then we have the heading within the subsection that's always in red. And below that we have the subheading that's always in blue, with the codes listed below. You will notice that the surgery section has been divided up into 8 sections. Those sections consist of integumentary, musculoskeletal, respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, urinary, male genital, female genital, nervous system, and eye and ocular adnexa. We will come back to the tabular in a moment, but for now, let's move on to the guidelines. Again, we're going to use the surgery section as an example. Here on the first couple of pages, you'll see the surgery guidelines. These guidelines pertain only to the surgery section, but all sections have their own specific guidelines that must be read and followed for assigning the codes in those sections. I can't stress enough how important it is to read the guidelines before assigning the codes. From the surgery guidelines page, turn a page or two until you get to code 10180 so you can follow along. On this page we have the next 2 types of notes as well as a coding tip. First we have an instructional note. Instructional notes may pertain to a particular section, a subsection, heading, or subheading. Here under debridement, this instructional note here only pertains to the debridement codes. Now let's look over at 11000 under debridement. Here's our next type of note, which is a parenthetical note, meaning in parentheses. This means that the note pertains to this code only, and in this case instructs you to possibly go somewhere else for your code. Let me explain. CPT 11000 says debridement of extensive eczematous or infected skin, up to 10% of the body surface. Then the parenthetical note says for abdominal wall or genitalia debridement for necrotizing soft tissue infection. See 11004 through 11006. So if your scenario does not mention abdominal wall or genitalia, you would ignore the note and not go there. But if it did state one or the other, you would leave this code and go to the range of codes listed to find the most appropriate one for your scenario. Parenthetical notes can also give directions to modifiers that may need to be added to a particular code, as well as other notes. One last thing you'll want to pay close attention to is the coding tip. This reminds you of guidelines and gives instructions at times on what a particular procedure involves. For instance, this one here reminds you to code to the deepest level when coding a debridement. You will notice these randomly throughout your book. So let's think about all of these notes for just a second. What does all of this mean? Well, for CPT code 11000, you will have surgery guidelines to follow, as well as instructional notes that you'll need to follow, as well as parenthetical notes to follow. Now that's a lot of direction, and why I mentioned this is not a job that just anyone can do. It is a learned skill to be able to read a chart and assign codes appropriately, and you will be able to do this. Next we have our symbols that we need to watch for. Any one or a combination of these placed to the left of a code can give guidance on the type of code it is or something unique about that code that you need to know. There are 10 symbols in all. Since all of these change from year to year, we will look at the appendices as we go through them. Remember, each of the appendix is listed in the blue section at the back of your book right before the index. As we go through them, you can pause the video, choose a code, and go back and look at it in the tabular list and see how it works. The red dot represents a new code. Turn to Appendix B and look for a code with a red dot. It should say Added Code beside it. Now go to the tabular list and view the code in particular. The red dot means that the code is brand new to the current year CPT. These will change every year as many codes are added yearly. Staying with Appendix B, we also have the blue triangle. Look again in this section and find a blue triangle beside a code. Once you find one, the code's full description appears. Here you can see what was deleted in the code because it has a strike through on it, or what has been added because it's underlined. Take a code that you found and go into the tabular and see what changes are made. The code you look for in the tabular will not have either of these marks on it. So to know what has changed, you need to refer to Appendix B. In Appendix D, the codes here are designated by a plus symbol in the tabular. All of these codes are considered add-on codes. Choose one and find it in the tabular list. The plus means they are never coded by themselves. They must be added to another code or primary procedure to be used. Here's our next symbol, meaning these codes are exempt from Modifier 51. As you will learn about modifiers in the course, Modifier 51 is to show an additional procedure. The codes with this symbol indicate that when used with an additional procedure, they do not require a 51 modifier. However, not to mix these up with the codes in the previous page, these codes do not have a plus sign next to them, so they can be billed alone if need be. Our next symbol is the bullseye, and these codes can be found in Appendix G. The codes here mean that they already include conscious sedation, and it would not be coded separately. You will also notice that many of these codes begin with a 3 or a 4, and the reason is because they are colonoscopies, upper endoscopies that are always done with some type of conscious sedation, so it's not necessary to add another code to show that. The charge associated with these CPTs already takes into consideration that for the payment. The lightning bolt is found on codes in Appendix K, and represents products such as vaccines that are pending FDA approval. Once FDA approval has been received, the lightning bolt is removed and the code stands alone as any other code. Next, we have our facing green arrows. These arrows encompass new and revised text from the previous year's CPT book. These can be found in guidelines, instructional notes, and parenthetical notes. Remember, it will not be in the codes themselves because that's shown with the blue triangle for a revised code. Next is the hashtag or number sign. All codes that have been sequenced out of their numerical order are listed in Appendix N. This happens is because technology or medical advances are made that require the existing code to be placed in a different area. Here look at CPT 27337. 27337 in the numerical order is listed at the bottom in red. The code being in red means it's out of numerical order. Next to it is a note stating that you should see 27323 through 27365 to find your code description. You'll notice I put that entire section here for you. You then must look through this list of codes to find one with a hashtag or a number sign, and here it is. In order to not create a new code, this one was just reordered using the symbol and brought up. The last two symbols that we have are the circle, which indicates a reinstated code or recycled code. There are not any for 2016, but the symbol remains for following years to come. Then the arrow within the blue, green, and red circles refer you to AMA's references to CPT changes. We will not be using this in this course. Finally, let's look at the code format. Knowing how to read the code is key. The more you indent in a code selection, the more specific it can be. The key is the semicolon. In order to save space within the book, the semicolon is used in every code that has a further specified code within its descriptor. This is also known as a parent code to the codes underneath of it. Let's look at 21920. Biopsy, soft tissue of back or flank. Semicolon, superficial. In and of itself, this is the entire code description for 21920. However, if it was a deep biopsy of soft tissue of the back or flank, we would need to move down to 21925. When we say this procedure, we start out with the 21920 and move to the semicolon, then drop down to deep. So the entire code description for CPT 21925 is biopsy soft tissue of the back or flank deep.
I know you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? But I promise you, it is a lot of information, but you're going to be able to do it. Having this is a skill set. It's not something that just everyone can pick up and be able to do. And if you weren't up for the challenge, you wouldn't be here right now. So I know you're going to be able to do it. It's going to take some perseverance, but you'll be able to do it. You've got the background. You're going to take the A&P and the medical terminology that you have. You're going to use that information and bring it into the book, use the guidelines out of the book, and it's going to make you a much better coder. You'll be able to actually go out into a physician's office or a facility, an outpatient facility, and you'll be able to code and apply those codes that actually add charges to a physician's claim, send it off to insurance, and have it come back with the appropriate reimbursement. You don't want to be the person who doesn't know how to do it, who just applies a code without the documentation that's needed in order to be able to do it, and then subject your physician or your facility to some type of audit where you're fined with huge fees or even possibly imprisonment just because you fraudulently billed for that physician. So the goal is for you to be employable so that you're able to actually go out and work in this field of healthcare, coding, doing something that I love. So I hope this helps, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.